Story 1. The surprisingly cozy life of a Viking fisherman. You awaken before the dawn, as the hearth's last coals hum faintly under the smell of ash and salt. The longhouse is still your wife and children wrapped tightly in wool blankets, their breathing deep and slow. Beyond the door, the northern wind sighs through the cracks, and the sea whispers against the stones. You are a fisherman, and this is your ordinary day in a small coastal settlement somewhere in 9th century Norway. It isn't war or plunder that fills your life, though that is what most would imagine when they hear of the Norse. It is the rhythm of nets and tides, the dull, beautiful repetition that keeps a family alive. The first thing you feel is the weight of your clothes, a woolen tunic coarse but warm, a fur-lined cloak, boots stiff with salt. Each piece tells its own quiet story spun by your wife, traded from a neighbor, mended in winter by firelight. The Viking world is not only built on raids, it's woven, patched, smoked, salted, and sewn by hands like yours. You open the door, and the cold meets you without hesitation. The fjord below is calm, framed by dark slopes that still wear their veil of night. It's hard to imagine that beyond those waters lies a world of kingdoms, empires, and faiths you've never seen. For you, the horizon is not a mystery, it's a boundary. You fish to feed your family, to trade for barley, iron hooks, or a rare slab of salt. Beyond that, the rest of the world feels like gossip from the next village. Down by the shore, your boat waits, a small open vessel built from pine, tarred against the wet and mended endlessly. The planks creak as you step inside, your oarlocks squeaking like sleepy ravens. With every push, you feel the resistance of the water, not hostile, but firm, like an old friend reminding you of the rules. The oars dip, the boat glides. You remember what your father said once, long ago. The sea never changes, but it never stays the same. It's a riddle that makes more sense each year. The fjord feeds, punishes, and forgives, all at once. There are no gods here that you can see, only the slow breathing of the tide and the wheeling of gulls that mark the sky like runes. The work beneath the calm. Most days the fishing begins with silence. No one speaks. The sea demands listening. You and the two others in your crew, neighbors, cousins perhaps, spread the net carefully, working by the feel of rope against your palms. Each knot matters. Each pull decides whether there will be enough fish to trade for grain at week's end. Cod, herring, and flatfish are your lifeblood. Cod, especially easy to dry, to preserve, to carry inland. A single good catch can mean survival through months when the fjord freezes and no sails move. You haul the nets, not with speed but with the steady patience of those who have no other choice. The rhythm is your prayer. The smell of brine fills your nose, the sting of salt on your hands never fades. Every motion you make, every lift of the net, every toss of a fish into the basket, echoes the same motion made by your father and his father before him. This is your inheritance, not gold, not glory, but continuity. The sun begins to rise. The light spills over the water like pale honey, catching on the spray. It turns the fjord into molten glass. You stop rowing for a moment, breathing it in, the kind of beauty no skald will ever write about because it's too simple, too daily. The gulls cry overhead. The cold burns your face. Somewhere behind you, the longhouse smoke curls upward, a signal that the hearth is alive, breakfast is being stirred. For a fisherman, there is comfort in repetition. The world can collapse into chaos, kings can fall, and distant wars can rage, but your task remains constant. Mend the nets, read the sky, feed your family. Shore and hearth. By midday, the catch is in. You drag the boat back onto the pebbled shore, your arms heavy, your boots soaked. The women and older children come to help, spreading the fish on wooden racks to dry. You rub your hands together, the salt grinding into your skin, and you feel the faintest warmth of pride. In the Viking world, a fisherman is not a hero. You are rarely sung about, but you are essential, the quiet spine that holds the settlement upright. Inside the longhouse, the air is thick with smoke from the hearth. Fish hang from beams above, drying slowly in the warmth. You sit near the door, eating from a wooden bowl barley porridge thickened with fish fat and a few bitter herbs. The talk is low, unhurried. The stories told are not of gods or glory, but of storms, nets, and strange tides. In the evenings, you work on your tools. Hooks are sharpened, ropes coiled, oars mended with care. Each repair feels like a conversation with the sea and understanding that it will take as much as it gives. Outside, the wind rises again. You can hear it slipping along the fjord like an animal. The cold presses close, but you have warmth here, not comfort as modern minds might define it, but a kind of quiet belonging. You know the weight of your place in the world. The larger world you'll never see. Sometimes traders come. They arrive in boats heavier and broader than yours, sails marked with red or blue. They bring iron tools from the Franks, glass beads from the east, and rumors, endless rumors. They say that kings across the sea build churches taller than any longhouse, and that men fight for gods who forbid feasting on certain days. They tell of silver coins stamped with faces, of markets larger than entire villages, of lands where salt costs more than gold. You listen, but you do not dream of going. The sea is enough. You have seen it calm, seen it rise like a beast, seen it take men and never return them. To survive its moods is already a kind of victory. Still, sometimes on clear nights, when the stars gather like frost over the water, you wonder what lies beyond. What kind of fishermen work the coasts of foreign lands? Do they mend their nets the same way? Do they pray to the same sea gods or whisper different names into the wind? The night deepens. You bank the fire, listening to its last crackle. The world outside is ice and darkness, but inside there is the steady breathing of those you love. You lie back, your head resting on a folded cloak, and close your eyes. Tomorrow will come with the same cold dawn, the same nets, the same sound of water against wood. But there is a peace in that sameness, a peace earned through patience and rhythm. Still, as you drift toward sleep, a question lingers, a small ripple against the still surface of your thoughts. What happens when the sea stops giving, when the fish vanish, and the fjord no longer breathes the same way? The winter without fish. The cold arrived early this year. Before the trees had finished shedding their leaves, before the soil froze beneath your boots, the fjord changed. The fish that had once danced in the nets like coins scattered in a dream vanished. First a few empty casts, then several, then a week where the only thing caught was seaweed and silence. You were not the only one who noticed. The elders began muttering about strange tides, of something wrong in the salt. The wind had shifted too soon, they said. The birds were flying lower. The sun's path had dipped faster than it should have. In your gut, though, you didn't think it was an omen. It was something simpler. The cod had moved. South, maybe, or deeper. That was the reality of life as a fisherman. Nature didn't explain itself. Still, explanation was one thing. Survival was another. Frugal hands and empty baskets. You began to count not coins, because there were few of those, but fish. Dried stockfish hanging in the smokehouse. Salted herring packed in clay jars. A few trout cured in brine, and 2 small barrels of pickled scraps that you once thought were for guests. Every fish became an object of strategy. Your wife, Inga, took over the math. She measured portions with her hand, wrapped bundles of dried herbs into thin strips of leather to trade for root vegetables. She was not panicked, but her eyes grew sharper, her voice quieter. She stopped singing when she stirred the stew pot. In the longhouse, dinner became a ritual of silence. You chewed slowly, not out of etiquette but caution. You learned to savor broth as if it were meat. Even the children stopped asking for second helpings. Your nets, meanwhile, lay rolled and untouched. You still rose at dawn, not because there was hope of a catch, but because habit does not vanish as quickly as fish. You went to the fjord, stared into its surface, sometimes threw a line out as if just to remind the water you were there. Sometimes you caught nothing, sometimes not even that. The unseen economy. It was in these lean weeks that you came to understand something that no saga ever sang about. Survival had little to do with strength, and everything to do with relationships. You traded half a spool of spare line for a pouch of barley with Haldor, who had stored extra grain that year. You helped mend a neighbor's fence in exchange for a dozen turnips. You brought your smallest dried cod to the old widow at the edge of the village not for trade, but for memory, because once she had helped birth your son. The economy was not measured in coins, but in mutual need. Trust became currency. Down by the smokehouse, the racks hung emptier each week. A strange quiet fell over the village, broken only by the sharpening of knives or the scraping of boots on frost. No one starved, not yet, but everyone was watching the sky a little more closely, listening for the return of fish as if it were a long-lost god. And still the fjord kept its secrets. Old stories resurface. One evening, as the wind scraped against the thatch and the longhouse creaked like an old bone, your father spoke. He hadn't said much in recent years. Age had curled his spine and softened his voice, but now he leaned forward by the hearth and said, "It happened once before, when I was a boy. The fish left for 3 seasons. Everyone stopped eating." He told of a year when the fjord gave nothing, when nets dried into brittle ropes, when hunger knelt beside every man's bed, but they had survived, not through strength, he said, but stubbornness. Traded moss for soup, cooked seal blubber, gathered kelp, learned to live not from the sea but despite it. Winter doesn't care, he said. It comes anyway, whether you're ready or not. No one slept easily that night. The visit from the south. 2 weeks later, a boat arrived, not from your village, not even from your fjord. It was a broad-bellied vessel, low in the water, its single square sail hanging limp with damp. On board were 3 men with thick beards, foreign accents, and trade goods, but what they offered was not luxury, it was news. They had come from further south, following the coast, trading slowly up the line of settlements, and they had seen what you had feared. The fish had moved southward toward warmer waters. In some places, the catch had improved. In others, famine had taken hold. One town they passed had seen 2 children die. Another was emptying out, families moving inland to seek grain from distant farms. They spoke of a village that had taken to boiling birch bark, of a man who had built a floating trap to follow the shoals. The sea was shifting, not vanishing, just changing. You listened, and in your chest, a question began to form, heavy and cold as the fjord. Should you stay? What leaving would mean? Leaving your village wasn't easy, not emotionally and certainly not logistically. Your longhouse had been built by your father's hands. The roof beams had been carried from the forest 2 valleys away. Every stone in the hearth was chosen by someone who knew your name. To abandon this place would not feel like travel. It would feel like betrayal. And yet, hunger whispers louder than heritage. A few families began preparing. Quietly. They packed dried fish, bundled their cloaks, began whispering about a southern bay where the cod were still biting. One man even sold his best axe for extra rope. But others stayed, out of pride, out of fear, out of inertia. You felt caught between the slow certainty of starvation and the dangerous promise of motion. You were not a raider. You were not made for glory or conquest. You were a fisherman, a man of routine, of nets and tides. And yet, even nets sometimes needed mending. Your own decision. Inga said little about it, but she packed the tools, quietly, methodically. She mended the fishing net even when you weren't using it. She dried meat in smaller portions, saved extra twine, looked at maps drawn by hand on stitched cloth. She was preparing, even if you were. And then one morning, your daughter, 6 winters old, looked up from her bowl of thin porridge and asked, "Will the fish ever come back?" You had no answer. Later that day, you stood by the shore. The tide was low. The stones were slick and sharp. The boat lay where it always had. The fjord exhaled soft, still, ancient. You bent to touch the water. It was colder than it should have been. Or perhaps your hands were simply warmer from too much waiting. You realized you had been living beside the sea but not listening to it. The fish were not gone. They were simply elsewhere. The sea was not angry. It was indifferent. To survive, you would have to move. And so, as winter deepens and the sky grows pale with snow, a quiet question rises like mist from the water. What waits for you and your nets further down the coast? The fjord behind you. You left before sunrise. Not in secret, not hurried, but with the quiet resignation of those who have long since made peace with necessity. The longhouse was emptied with care tools bundled in cloth, dried fish tied in sacks, the best cooking pot wrapped in wool for the journey. Your wife Inga carried your youngest son on her hip, and your eldest pulled the small cart, its wooden wheels creaking beneath salted jerky, firewood, and nets coiled like sleeping snakes. You were not the only one. 2 other families had chosen the same path. Others had stayed behind, some out of belief that the fish would return, others too old or stubborn to move again. They waved from the edge of the village, their breath misting in the cold morning air. No tears, just nods. The kind people give when they are unsure they'll ever see you again. The fjord did not mourn your departure. It mirrored the sky without a ripple, cold, unmoved, ancient. It had fed you, starved you, and now it would watch you go. You did not look back. The journey south. The trail south was not a road, not truly. It was a suggestion, a line of worn turf, trodden by traders, herders, and drifters over countless seasons. The land rose and fell like breath, and the sea stayed close, its voice never fully leaving your ears. You followed the coast, keeping the water to your right like an old friend walking beside you in silence. The days were short now. The sky seemed to pale by afternoon, and dusk folded in before the first bowl of stew was cooled. You slept in abandoned huts, beneath overturned boats, and once in a cave that smelled of wolves. The children adjusted more quickly than you expected, as if they had always known life could be motion. At night, Inga would press close to you beneath the furs, her breath warm against your collarbone. "There will be fish again," she whispered once. Not as a wish, as a certainty. A new shore. After 12 days of slow travel, your boots heavy with frost and your hands rough from rope burns, you arrived at the mouth of a wide bay. Smoke rose in threads from the distant rooftops. A settlement larger than your own had ever been. Boats lined the shore. Not just 2 or 3, but dozens, their hulls dark and tarred, their sails furled tight. You could smell the fish before you saw them. Cod mostly, big ones, some hanging in rows from racks like drying firewood, others being gutted, scraped, and salted by red-faced men in wool caps and women with knives as quick as gulls. You stood still for a moment, watching. In your chest, something relaxed that you didn't know had tightened. The world was wide, yes, but it still held the old patterns. Fishing was still possible. Beginning again. They did not welcome you with celebration. There were no feasts, no arms thrown wide, but neither did they turn you away. They asked your name, where you came from, and how many mouths you needed to feed. One man squinted at your boat, lashed to the back of your cart. "You know how to use it?" he asked. You nodded, he nodded back. You were offered space near the edge of the village by a rocky inlet where the tide flowed sharply. Not much room, but enough to pitch your shelter, mend your tools, and begin again. There was no resentment, only curiosity. People here understood that the sea gave and took, and if you were here, it was because the sea had taken something already. Inga made the fire that night. You gutted the last of the dried fish. The children fell asleep quickly, lulled by the sound of gulls they did not recognize. And for the first time in many weeks, you slept with something close to peace. Fishing in foreign waters. Fishing here was different. The waters were deeper, more restless. The currents more unpredictable. You learned from watching the others where they dropped their lines, how they set their drift nets, What kind of bait worked best in early winter? You listened more than you spoke. Some of your old tools failed here. The hooks were too small. The twine frayed against sharper rocks. But necessity is the quietest teacher, and you adapted. You carved new lures, learned the rhythm of the tides, adjusted your rowing style to avoid the undertow. Soon your name was known. You were not the outsider anymore, just the northerner with the steady net. You shared your catch with the man who gave you space. You helped repair a cracked hull for an older couple whose hands had grown too stiff for caulking. The community didn't sing about you, but they began to wave when you passed. Memories carried like nets. On clear days, you still thought of your old fjord. You wondered if the fish had returned, if the longhouse stood strong against the snow, if the smoke still rose in thin threads from the same hearth that had warmed your children when they were small. But these thoughts did not ache the way you feared they would. They had softened like wood smoothed by water. You carried them like you carried your nets, always there, useful even when empty. One morning, your daughter asked if she had ever swum in your old bay. You realized she didn't remember. Not really. Her life was here now, in this new cove beneath these unfamiliar cliffs. The sea was different, but her laughter when the boat rocked too hard was the same. You smiled and told her stories about the gulls you used to know, about a time when cod were so thick you could catch them with a forked stick. She listened wide-eyed, as if you were describing a myth. Perhaps in time it would become one. A quiet resilience. As spring approached, the catches grew stronger. Your nets came up full more often. The fire smoked less, the soup thickened more. You repaired your boat with better planks. You even bartered for a better hook knife, one with a carved hilt shaped like a fish, clearly made by someone who knew. Inga began planting again. Just a few onions and herbs to start. The children helped, their hands stained with soil and salt. One evening, you sat with the others around the fire pit near the docks. The sky was streaked with gold. A trader from across the channel spoke of new routes opening toward the west, where monks wore blue wool and built strange round towers. You listened, you smiled. But you did not need to go. This place, this new edge of the world, was enough. You had not sought adventure. You had only followed the absence of fish. And in doing so, you had found a second life, different, harder, but whole. The last thought. Sometimes you wake before dawn, as you used to. The boat rocks gently beside the dock. The tide hums its low music, and you find yourself asking not in fear, but in quiet curiosity. What would have happened if you'd stayed? Would the fish have returned? Would you have lasted? Would the fjord have forgiven your stubbornness? Or would it have sealed itself in ice, waiting for someone more patient? The answer, of course, will never come. That's the nature of tides, they move forward. You cannot fish the past. But still you carry it with you, in your hands, in your nets, in the smell of salt that never quite leaves your cloak. And you know this. The sea, for all its silence, has always rewarded those who listened carefully enough to leave when it stopped speaking. Story 2. A Day in the Mud. The Peasants of Medieval Flanders. Boot sinking slowly. The rooster calls before the sun does. You don't own the rooster, but its shrill cry slices through the cold morning just the same. It's early spring in the year 1312, and the fields are wet again. Flanders never really dries. The earth here is dark and rich, but constantly soggy like wet bread under your boots. And those boots, patched and stiff with grime, are the only ones you'll ever have. You are a peasant, and the mud is your constant companion. It stains your hands, cakes your clothes, and swallows your steps, but it also feeds you, so you walk through it again and again and again. Your name doesn't matter much to the world outside this hamlet, but inside the village, they call you Joris. That name carries meaning here enough to borrow a hammer, or call for help when your ox gets stuck in the ditch. It's enough to remind the priest who you are when he counts tithes, or to excuse you from the next tax levy, if you're lucky. The village that doesn't move. The village of Hanskoot isn't more than 24 families huddled together around a sagging wooden church and a few crumbling stone houses that have outlived 3 lords already. The wind comes straight from the North Sea, sharp and damp. Everything smells faintly of sheep and firewood. You live in a croft on the edge of the village, not so far that you're forgotten, but just far enough that when it rains, and it often does, the path to your door disappears under puddles the size of wash basins. The roof leaks when the wind is from the east. The hearth smokes when the peat is too damp. And yet you wake up and go to the fields, always. Breakfast without ceremony. Your first meal is more custom than cuisine. Barley bread, hard, crusted, dunked in ale or goat's milk. You chew slowly, more from caution than taste. A bit of dried turnip. If you're lucky, a smear of soft cheese that your neighbor traded for chicken feathers 2 weeks ago. Your wife lies, is already up, wrapping your youngest in wool while the older boy drags the family's rake out the door. He's barely 10, but his hands already show the thickened knuckles of labor. There's no time to be a child here, just smaller versions of the same adults doing the same work. The house is one room, always smoky. The fire never fully dies, it simply slouches into coals and waits for someone to stoke it again. You don't own much. A few bowls, a wooden spoon, a pot, some iron nails you guard with jealousy, and a rosary you found in the dirt 2 summers ago that the priest insists you must have stolen. But you also have tools, and land not your own, of course, but rented, and with them you can feed a family, sometimes. Mud as far as you can see. The field is low and heavy with spring water. Your boots suck at the muck like it wants to pull you under. These aren't the high fields where the land dries early. Those belong to the abbey. Yours are closer to the marsh, long, uneven strips of clay and wet loam that you turn with a heavy spade and curses in equal measure. There is no plow today, not because you don't own one, you don't, but because the ox is being borrowed by the neighbor in exchange for storing your firewood. So you dig, by hand. The spade bites into the soil, lifting great clods of wet earth that smell like last year's rot. You plant beans, early ones, hoping they won't drown if the rains come again. By mid-morning, your back aches in the familiar way. The kind of pain that never truly leaves, only hides when you're asleep. Nearby, other peasants work their own strips. No one talks much. There's too much to do, and besides, conversation can sound dangerously like complaining. And complaining leads to whispers. Whispers lead to trouble. You've seen what happens when someone speaks too loud about unfair rents or bad seed. The reeve listens, the reeve reports, and then a new tax arrives. Duties and dues. At noon, you return to the village not to rest, but to pay. It reeve day, the one afternoon a week when the local steward collects grain for the Lord's share. You're behind, as usual, not because you've withheld, but because your harvest was small last year. The barley shriveled from mildew, and the rats took more than their share of the rest. You hand over 2 sacks of oats, light ones, and bow your head. The reeve counts silently, frowns, and makes a small mark on his board. He says nothing, but you know that mark will follow you. Afterward, the priest catches you outside the chapel and gently reminds you that your Easter tithe is overdue. You nod and promise that next week will be better. It won't, but you say it anyway. That's life here, a rotating dance between hunger, debt, and hope. You never starve, not really, but you never feel full either. You survive in the narrow space between obligation and exhaustion. Afternoon in the shed. By mid-afternoon, you're repairing the fence around your patch of garden, a few rotten boards hammered back together with bent nails and prayers. Your shed smells of mold and stale hay, but inside you find the scythe head that needs fixing, and the old bridle that must be relashed before the ox returns tomorrow. Your tools are precious heirlooms of necessity. The hammer has a chipped handle. The adze was reforged from a horseshoe. But they are yours, and they are the difference between a full bowl and an empty one. The rain returns in a misty haze. You pull your cloak tighter and keep working. Pausing means falling behind, and there's no catching up once the spring planting begins in earnest. The peasant silence. At sunset, the village gathers not in joy but out of habit. People sit on stones or low benches, smoking, picking at calluses, watching the sky shift colors like an old tapestry fading. You talk about the weather, about sheep that wandered, about someone who got sick last week and never recovered. But no one says the obvious, that the land is tired, the taxes too high, and the new lord speaks only French. Such things are not said aloud, not anymore. You remember your cousin, the one who went south to join a band of rebels last year. He sent a letter once, said they would fight the lords for the soil beneath their feet. No one's heard from him since. The priest says he's burning in hell. You think maybe he found something better. Still, you do not speak his name. You have a family, a field, a cracked cup that still holds soup. You know your place, and you survive because of that knowledge. Into the smoke again. Night falls like a damp blanket. You return to the croft. The children are asleep on the straw bed, the baby tucked against your wife's chest. The fire is low, the stew thin but warm. You eat slowly, elbows on your knees, staring into the embers. Tomorrow you'll return to the field, and the next day, and the next. The mud will rise again. The spade will bite again. The debts will grow again, but so will the beans, and that is enough for now. And yet, as you lie down and pull the scratchy blanket over your aching knees, one thought remains. How long can you live this way before something, or someone, decides the mud must be stirred? The mud begins to stir. By the time spring swells into early summer, the land is green with false promises. The beans have sprouted, though slowly. The barley rises in thin patches like the stubble on your chin. Your garden survives, but just barely. Rain is constant this year, not in floods, but in a slow, constant weeping from the sky that never lets the ground breathe. The mud thickens under every step. It climbs your boots. It stains the legs of your children's tunics. It pulls at the wheels of carts and keeps animals in the same corner of pasture until the grass dies beneath them. Still, life continues, because it must. Until the Lord's man rides in. The new demand. He comes just after midday tall, wrapped in a thick cloak despite the warm weather, his horse cleaner than any man in the village. Behind him, two younger riders wear matching liveries, their eyes scanning everything with the gaze of people used to being obeyed. The reeve meets them at the village center. You and the others watch from doorways, tools in hand, backs bent but ears open. By order of the Count of Flanders, the messenger announces, each village within the barony must now provide additional wool, salted meat, and coin to support the defense of Lille. There is no war, not here. You haven't seen soldiers in a year, and even then they only marched through on their way to somewhere else. But now the Count demands tribute again, and this time it is more than grain. You must prepare your contribution by Michaelmas. 3 months, but even that feels impossible. Wool, your wife hasn't spun more than a sack since last autumn. Salted meat. You've eaten every pig not reserved for breeding. Coin. You rarely even see one, let alone own any. You exchange glances with your neighbors. No one speaks. No one argues. You all know what happens to villages that argue. The horsemen leave. Their hooves splash through puddles that you stepped around hours ago. And in their silence, the mud feels heavier. The cracks beneath obedience. That evening, something unusual happens. After the families eat barley stew, again a group of men linger outside the smith's hut, not in celebration, not in casual talk, in low, serious conversation, the kind that's mostly glances and half-finished sentences. You're invited by a nod, not directly, never directly, but enough that you leave your fire and walk down the lane, heart quiet and fast at once. They can't keep taking, says one man. Last winter we shared half the salt stores. Then the grain, now the wool and the meat. We've nothing left to trade. They're building armies, says another, hearing mercenaries with our food while we drown in mud. We could delay, someone offers, hold back a little just until after harvest. But someone else shakes his head. The reeve counts every sack. You know he'll report us, and the next time it won't be just riders, it'll be swords. You stay quiet listening, thinking. A year ago, no one would have dared this kind of talk, but now even the most obedient farmers feel the strain. The earth gives, but the lords always ask for more. The conversation ends in tired agreement. Do what you can, hide what you must, pray you aren't found out. You walk home beneath a low sky, the smell of peat smoke clinging to your sleeves. And for the first time, you wonder not just how you'll survive this season, but whether enduring is still the right thing to do. The hidden measures. The next week is a quiet rebellion. Your neighbor slaughters a lamb in secret, dries the meat in his attic. Your wife hides a sack of wool beneath the garden trench and tells the children it's buried treasure. You repair your fence by daylight and mend old snares by night. If you can catch rabbits or pheasants before the reeve arrives again, you might have something to trade. Poaching is a hanging offense, but hunger makes bold things seem ordinary. Even the priest seems to understand. He preaches generosity, but his sermons are shorter, less fire, more silence, as if even heaven itself is tired of these endless demands. Still, the sky never clears. The barley turns yellow too soon. The sheep grow restless from standing ankle-deep in mud all day. Your eldest coughs every night, a thick, wet sound that doesn't fade. You feed him boiled onions and pray, not to saints, not even to the Virgin, just to anything that might be listening. The stranger with the sack. One morning, as the sun barely rises above the fog, a stranger arrives. He walks no horse, no cart, just a walking stick, a sack slung over one shoulder, and boots so battered you can see straw poking from the seams. He's older than you, or maybe just more weathered. His face is gray with stubble, eyes sunk deep from long roads, but his hands are calloused, and he moves like someone who has not only seen mud but lived in it. You offer him a bowl of stew. He offers nothing in return, not right away, but after he eats he speaks. You're not the only ones, he says. Villages from Bruges to Kortrijk are groaning. The counts take more and leave less. You ask what people are doing. Some are leaving, some hiding, some fighting. The word lands like a stone in a still pond. You've heard of the weavers in Ghent, how they shut down their looms in protest last winter, how soldiers broke the doors and took the cloth by force. You thought it was just rumor. The stranger says it was. Even the peasants are starting to whisper, he says, and when the mud whispers, the castles get nervous. He leaves before dusk, doesn't say where he's headed, doesn't ask for shelter. But his words stay. The question you can't shake. That night, your wife asks if you believe him. You don't know, but you think about it as you stand outside, watching the clouds drift past a cracked moon. The fields, the tools, the obligations, all of it feels like a wheel turning endlessly. You work, you give, you bow, and still it isn't enough. And now, from Ghent to Kortrijk, even the peasants are whispering. But what would you do? You're no rebel, you have no sword, no strategy, just hands made for planting and boots made for trudging. You've lived your whole life knowing your place and surviving within it. But lately, survival has started to feel like surrender. And so, as the wind rises and the first early crickets begin to sing beneath the sodden hedges, you find yourself standing in the doorway of your croft, asking the question silently to the sleeping fields beyond. What happens if enough peasants stop bowing? When the mud rose up, it started with a chicken. Not yours, one belonging to a farmer 2 villages away, a man named Matthews. The story came down the path like smoke in the wind. The Lord's man had come to claim it, part of a new collection to supplement last month's tribute. Mathage refused. He didn't shout, he didn't strike, he simply said no. A chicken was all he had left to feed his daughter, so he said no. The messenger took it anyway, and when Mathage protested again, he was beaten, not badly, just enough to send a message. But the message spread further than anyone expected. The days that follow. Within a week, the quiet murmur across the mudflats and narrow cart paths turned into something harder, less afraid. Men began to gather in the evenings not just to whisper about taxes, but to speak of alternatives. One night you were there. The meeting took place in a hay barn, behind a cart turned sideways to block the door. The air inside was damp with the smell of old straw and sweat. Men and women, perhaps 30 of them, stood in a crooked circle, their shoulders hunched not in shame, but caution. "They take and take," someone said, "and leave nothing for our children. They expect us to work the land and starve on it." When the burghers in Bruges stopped paying, they sent guards, but there are more of us than there are of them. It was a simple truth, one that had always been true and yet rarely spoken aloud. There were more of you, always had been. You dug the soil, raised the sheep, fed the cities. You turned the wheels that turned the world. You just never stopped turning them long enough to realize it. The decision to march. A date was chosen. Not a battle, no one called it that. You didn't own swords. You weren't soldiers. You were field hands and weavers, shepherds and coopers. But on the first Sunday of harvest season, when the reeve returned to count the tithes, no one would show. Instead, you'd all gather, together, publicly. Not to riot, not to burn, just to stand, and to say, enough. It was a small thing, but small things can be loud in the right context. Your wife helped prepare. She stitched a hidden pouch into your cloak where you kept a slip of dried meat and 2 iron nails in case things turned violent. Not much of a weapon, but enough to remind you that fear could be wielded too. She said nothing as you left that morning, but she kissed your hand like it was already bleeding. The day of the gathering. It was a Sunday like any other gray skies, cold wind, the smell of wet grain in the air. But instead of heading to the church for Mass or the fields for work, the peasants of Hanskoot and the neighboring villages walked to the center of the road where the reeve would arrive. They came in 2s and 3s quietly, over 100 of them. No banners, no slogans, just cloaks, tools, faces, and silence. The reeve arrived on horseback with 2 men carrying short spears and a scroll. He expected to read, to write, to tally sacks of grain and weight of wool. Instead, he was met with stillness. He asked for names. No one spoke. He read the orders again. No one moved. Then someone, not you, not anyone you even knew, stepped forward and said calmly, "You've taken all we can give." That was all. The reeve looked from face to face, his own expression growing pale. He knew. There were too many of you. If he struck one, 10 might strike back. If he called for guards, they might not arrive in time. He left, not in retreat, but with the slowness of someone realizing they had miscalculated the weight of silence. What came after? Word spread quickly. Other villages heard. Some laughed, "It'll do nothing." Others grew bold and joined. By the end of that month, 6 hamlets refused tithes. 2 more refused to send wool. One, remarkably, built a barricade of bramble and dung across the road and turned away a tax cart. It wasn't a war, not yet, but something had shifted. And then from Bruges came news that changed everything. Artisans in the city, dyers, fullers, and weavers, had struck work. The city guards refused to drag them from their looms. The mayor tried to speak, but the crowd turned their backs. 1 week later, someone posted a parchment to the church door, a list of grievances: taxes too high, lords too cruel, priests too wealthy. Your neighbor called it madness, but your wife read the list 3 times. The quiet fire of change. By autumn, the harvest came in strong. Some said it was luck, Others said God had blessed the rebellion, but in truth it was simply the land patient, dark, generous, and finally dry. You gave part of your grain to the village stores, but none went to the reeve. He never returned. For the first time in memory, you kept what you had planted. The village was still poor, the wind still cold, the mud still thick, but something was different. The people stood straighter, laughed more, looked one another in the eye. The priest gave shorter sermons and offered bread more freely. No one asked him to. He simply adapted. One night as you lay beside the fire, your son asked, "Are we free now?" You didn't know what to say. You were still tied to the land, still bowed to weather and debt. The Lord still existed, but something inside you had indeed broken free, and not in anger but in resolve. You said only, "We're not as stuck as we used to be." The reflection. Years later, others would rise. The Bruges Matins, a real revolt. Blood, blades, bells ringing through the cobbled streets as peasants and guildsmen turned against their overlords. The history books would remember those moments. But not this. Not the field hands who simply stopped walking to the reeve. Not the women who buried wool beneath the garden. Not the 100 villagers who stood in silence and refused to yield. No one would sing about it. No chronicler would write it down. But in that summer of 1312, on the edge of Flanders, when the earth was heavy and the world demanded more than it gave, the mud rose up, just a little. And it remembered what it meant to say enough. Story 3. The Stone Counters of Babylon, Early Accountants and the Dawn of Bureaucracy. Clay and counting marks. The sun over Babylon does not rise, it reveals. First with a faint smear of color over the mud-brick skyline, then with a hard, golden certainty that strikes rooftops and courtyards like the touch of a god. You wake before it as always. The clay is still cool beneath your feet. You are not a farmer, not a soldier, not a priest. You are a scribe, or more precisely, an accountant, though the word will not exist for another 3,000 years. In this city of temples and palaces, canals and barley fields, you serve a quieter role. You keep track. Wheat, wool, beer, goats, taxes, ration, labor days. You tally what others plant, build, offer, and consume. You are the one who turns life into numbers. And you do it with clay. The tablets and the stylus. Your tools are simple. A stylus made from a carved reed flat on one end, pointed on the other, and wet clay shaped into tablets no larger than your hand. Each day, you prepare a fresh pile. You smooth the clay with your palm until it's even and soft, then let it rest beneath a damp cloth until needed. The writing itself, cuneiform, is not difficult once mastered, though to the untrained it looks like birds' feet stamped in dust. You press the stylus in rhythmic patterns, vertical wedges, horizontal dashes, angled points. The shapes are deceptively plain, yet they contain the entire beating heart of this city. This morning you write. Letter 12038, letter 120A0, letter 1230, B, letter 1207A, letter 12049. 6 Sela of beer given to laborers on Canal Wall 4. Not poetry, not philosophy, but it is a fact, and facts, as your master says, are the bones that hold the empire upright. A city built on lists. Babylon in 1800 BCE is not a land of mystery, it is a land of management. Every loaf of bread baked for the temple workers is recorded. Every sheep given as tribute from the northern provinces is measured, weighed, and marked down. Every pot of beer handed to a brickmaker has a tablet behind it. And you are part of the apparatus. You don't ask why the taxes are collected. You record that they were. You don't debate if the temple needed 40 goats for a festival. You simply tally the names of the men who brought them. Each day, you sit on a low bench beside a courtyard wall, shaded by a canopy of woven reeds, and men come to you. Some wear tunics of coarse wool. Others have headbands, signifying minor offices. A few bring tokens, small baked pebbles marked with symbols. 5 bundles of barley, they say. 3 measures of flax. 1 broken cart axle repaired by apprentice. You nod, you press your stylus, you mark it all. At noon, you bring the day's tablets to the storehouse clerk, who lays them out to dry in the sun like small, square loaves. Some will be erased and reused. Others will be fired in kilns to become permanent records. It is not glamorous work, but it endures. The weight of bureaucracy. You serve a temple, not a god. The temple owns land, fields, livestock, kilns, looms, and most importantly, people. Hundreds of them workers, overseers, guards, granary watchers, cooks, cleaners, and someone must ensure that each one receives their proper share. There is no money, not really. There is barley, and oil, and labor. The currency of the kingdom is trust, enforced by measurement. The walls of your workplace are lined with shelves of tablets. Some are old, generations old, with names no one remembers and weights of barley long since eaten. But they are kept, always, because to lose a record is to lose authority. Your supervisor says this often. If a king dies, he is buried. If a record disappears, so is his rule. You once laughed at that, you don't anymore. Training the hand and the eye. You were not born into this work, you earned it. As a boy, you learned the symbols by copying them again and again into soft sand. Later, into scraps of clay. You practiced for years, memorizing not just signs but formats, how to structure an entry, how to space a row, how to write without wasting space or confusing values. You learned numbers base 60, not 10. A dizzying system of calculations involving combinations of vertical and corner wedges that your fingers still remember faster than your thoughts. You learned units of measure. Letter 12079 Sila, a measure of volume for liquids. Letter 1235D, gore for grain. Letter 12038, shekel for weight. Letter 121AA, day for time. And perhaps most importantly, you learn tone. Never accuse, never speculate. A good scribe records without opinion. If there are mistakes, they are someone else's problem. You are the surface on which the truth is pressed. Evening in the counting room. As the sun begins to slope westward, the city changes tone. The canal workers return. The smell of cooked lentils and grilled onions wafts from narrow alleys. Drums begin to beat in the distant temple, not for worship, but to mark the changing shift. You sit with your colleagues, reviewing tablets. One has been smudged, someone dropped it before drying. Another is missing a sign. The young apprentice responsible will be punished, though likely not harshly. Everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone writes them down. Someone laughs softly. You glance up to see your friend Edel Marduk miming the overseer's stiff walk. Even among counters and clerks, humor finds a way. You return to your own clay, double-checking tallies from the morning. 12 loaves sent to the kiln workers. 4 measures of wool to the weaving hall. 17 men accounted for in the southern irrigation crew. It is boring, yes, but there's a strange peace in the precision. Babylon at night. When you finally return home, the streets are cooling under a purple sky. The city's towers glow softly in the fading light, their baked brick walls warm to the touch. A man sells dates from a basket. Children chase one another with sticks. A dog barks near the canal. You step into your room, a modest space, clay walls, a cot, a small jug of water. You light a lamp, eat flatbread with goat cheese, and pour a few sips of beer. It is thick and bitter but filling. You do not dream of kings or conquest. You dream of even rows, of unbroken marks, of tables that balance. And as you lie down, your mind returns to a number you saw today, one that seemed off. 16 bundles of flax where there should have been 18. A tiny error. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps something. And the thought lingers, sharp and unfinished. What happens to a kingdom built on numbers? when the numbers begin to lie, when the numbers don't add up. The discrepancy is small, two missing bundles of flax, but it stays in your mind. Flax, once dried and spun, becomes linen. Linen becomes cloth. Cloth becomes temple garments, dowry, fabric, or more often payment. It is no minor thing. You recall the entry clearly, 18 bundles due from the eastern tenant farmers, yet the tablet showed 16. The tablet was signed, marked, dried. But incorrect. Errors are not unusual, clay smudges, reeds slip, but you know your own hand. You know this figure passed through the overseer, was checked, approved, logged. Now the question gnaws at you, was it a mistake? Or was it altered? The weight of detail. In the world of Babylon's bureaucracy, a two-bundle error is a pebble. But in a system where every laborer is fed based on these numbers, every drop of oil, every loaf of bread, every small discrepancy echoes outward. You begin to pay closer attention. Not openly. That would be dangerous. You simply slow your work rereading older tablets, comparing inventories from previous months, looking at what goes in and what is said to have gone out. And slowly, you begin to notice something. In the entries handled by a particular overseer Belcudure, a man with a sharp beard and careful eyes, small misalignments are common. A barley shipment short by a few sela. A record of bricks claimed to be completed, yet your own count says otherwise. Payments marked delivered before the workers even report their tasks finished. Each instance is small, perhaps explainable, but their accumulation speaks of something else. Misuse. Quiet investigations. You tell no one, not yet. You are not a judge, you are not a priest. You are a clerk, a record maker, but you also understand the system. You are the system, one of its many fingers, and when a finger detects a wound, it can either ignore it or investigate. So you ask questions casually. You speak with an apprentice scribe who logged deliveries last month. You double-check a laborer's rations against the tablet recorded. You walk past the kiln and see fewer finished bricks than the numbers suggest. You even visit the linen room and speak with the weaving supervisor. We've had shortages lately, she says, not looking up from her spindle. Blamed it on pests. You nod, you thank her, but your stomach turns. It is not pests. It is theft. A system too big to see itself. Babylon is a city that functions because it trusts its own mechanisms. Clay tablets replace memory. Seals replace character. Styluses replace speech. But now you see the flaw. The system only works if all the hands are honest. And the higher the hand, the harder it is to reach. Belcudure is not a great man, but he manages men who manage you. He delivers numbers, and no one questions them until now. You consider telling your superior. But then you remember what happened to the last clerk who accused someone above him. His apprenticeship ended. His rations were reduced. His housing reallocated. He left Babylon shortly after. No one said why. You sit at your bench, stylus hovering over clay, and realize, facts may be the bones of empire, but bones can be broken. The risk of accuracy. One day, you're called to a private meeting. Not unusual. Clerks are often summoned to help settle disputes or verify entries. But this one is different. Belcudure is there, standing beside a senior priest. Your heart tightens. You bow respectfully, arms at your side. There seems to be confusion, says the priest. A record shows flax short by 2 bundles. You nod, say nothing. Belcudure says it was a miscalculation by a junior scribe, one of yours. You wait. Belcudure smiles faintly, not kindly. I told him not to bother you, you're precise, diligent, we appreciate that. You murmur thanks. But there's no need to revisit old numbers. The work moves forward, yes. It is not a question. You bow again, you leave, you do not speak. But now you understand the truth. He knows you know. The tablet you do not submit. That evening, after the temple is quiet, you take a fresh clay tablet. And you write not a record but a testimony. You list the discrepancies. You record the patterns. You name Belcudure. You mark the dates. It is not accusation. It is observation. Then you take a second tablet. You write only a number, 2, the missing flax. You hide both, carefully, not in your chamber, but within the clay wall of the storage house behind a loose brick that only a record keeper would notice. You do not show them to your superior, not yet, because sometimes truth must wait. The cost of knowing. For weeks nothing happens. Belcudure greets you as before. The priest gives no sign of suspicion. The ledgers continue to flow. The tablets are pressed, dried, archived. But something is different. You feel it in how the guards watch you near the granary, in how your apprentice is replaced without explanation, in the silence of coworkers who once laughed with you in the shade of the canal wall. Truth, you've learned, is not always welcomed, especially when it endangers the smooth function of systems built on balance and ritual. Yet you do not stop recording. The bigger picture. One day, a group of scribes from another temple arrive visitors, part of an exchange to standardize weights and measures. You're chosen to assist them, not as a punishment, as a relocation. You leave Babylon for a smaller town along the Euphrates, carrying your tools and a mind sharpened by numbers and caution. There the work is slower, simpler. You oversee inventories of fish oil, grain shipments, even the tally of reeds for boat making. You do not speak of Belcudure. You do not reveal what you buried in the wall. But you carry the knowledge of how systems rise and how they rot quietly from within. The quiet revolution of clay. Years pass. One day, you hear that Belcudure has been promoted. He now oversees irrigation schedules for an entire province. You feel a weight in your chest, but not surprise. The system did not punish him, it needed him. But you know this, the rot has been recorded, the facts do exist. And maybe one day another scribe will find the tablets you left and read them, not to accuse, but to understand. Because that is the real power of record keeping. It doesn't stop injustice, but it preserves it. And in preservation comes the possibility of change. Still, one question lingers, written only in the mind. What happens to an empire when its numbers become fiction, and fiction becomes law? Empire in a clay envelope. The years pass. The reeds still grow tall beside the canals. The Euphrates still cuts across the land like a braided ribbon, feeding barley and fig trees alike. But the faces at the tablet bench have changed. The names on the records, too. Where you once wrote the rations for laborers on wall 4, a younger man now scratches symbols with a nervous hand. You are no longer the junior scribe. You are the old one, now the quiet man at the back of the storehouse with ink under his fingernails and silence behind his eyes. But you still record. And in the small, unassuming town where you were sent far from Babylon's glittering towers, you've come to understand something deeper about your craft. You are not simply preserving facts. You are preserving memory. And memory, it turns out, is the foundation of civilization. The power in preservation. The scribes who trained you believed in accuracy. They taught you how to calculate labor yields, how to track tax contributions, how to mark the difference between a shekel of barley and a shekel of copper. But what they never said, or perhaps never knew, was that these marks were more than numbers. They were agreements. They were the quiet contracts between ruler and ruled, between temple and peasant, between the gods and the grain. When someone brought a goat to the temple, it was not just a donation, it was a line in a larger story, a record of exchange, a moment added to the collective trust. You began to see that every dried clay tablet was a thread. Alone, it was dull, but together thousands upon thousands of them they formed a web, a net, an invisible infrastructure that held the entire empire upright. And like all webs, it was delicate. The missing tablets. One day, during a routine archive review, a young scribe discovers a set of tablets gone missing. They're not significant on their own. A series of grain tallies from a nearby village, stamped with a governor's seal, but they're part of a larger set. Without them, an annual tax assessment cannot be verified. The priest is concerned. He asks questions. A week later, it becomes clear. The tablets were deliberately removed. You sit with the others in the storehouse. No one speaks it aloud, but you know what it means. Someone has found a way to rewrite reality by erasing the past. And in a world where the clay tells the truth, this is the closest thing to a crime against time itself. The missing numbers will be adjusted. New tablets will be made. The grain will be reassessed. The villagers may pay again for what was already recorded. You understand now what you once only suspected. Fiction has entered the archive. Clay forged into control. Babylon's bureaucracy was built on clay, but clay can be molded. Where once tablets were used only to record, now they are used to persuade. The temple releases statements of divine surplus, encouraging citizens to contribute more to the gods. A new governor distributes stylized tablets extolling the productivity of his lands, even as rations grow thin. Scribes are asked to create copies of older records and then quietly destroy the originals. Dates are changed, weights adjusted. At first you feel outrage, then sadness. But then something more dangerous. Fascination. Because here is the deeper truth. Even lies require careful record keeping. Even deception must be cataloged with precision. The clerks of fiction are still clerks, and their tools are the same. Clay stylus memory. The accountant's rebellion. You never raise your voice. You never refuse a task, but you begin to do something that no one notices at first. In the margins of adjusted tablets you press small, almost invisible marks. A wedge here, a line there. Codes only another scribe would recognize. You create layers. 2 tablets with the same heading, one public, one hidden. The hidden one goes into your own satchel, which you bury once a season beneath a slab of dried reeds. You seal them with your own symbol, a modest triangle flanked by 2 vertical lines. Your own truth vault. Over time it grows, a private archive of what really happened, not to change the world, but to remember it properly. Because someone, someday, may wonder how the empire fell, and perhaps if they find your vault they will understand. Not because the armies failed, but because the math was rewritten. Conversations with the clay. Late at night, after your duties are finished, you sometimes sit with your hands in soft clay. Not working, not writing, just feeling. You think of the first scribes, the ones who pressed tokens into pots and called them ledgers. The ones who realized that a symbol could outlive a voice, that a wedge pressed just right could carry the weight of a man's labor across time. You wonder if they felt what you do now, this strange, quiet power. You are not a king. You will never be remembered in hymns. But somewhere, someone might one day dig up one of your tablets and read your hand. And in that moment, they will know that someone, long ago, paid attention. That's all you ever wanted. A city of stones. In your last years, you return to Babylon not by order but by invitation. A new archive is being built. Stone shelves, clay vaults, a monument to information. You walk the halls slowly. You recognize none of the faces but all of the shapes. Thousands of tablets, sorted, sealed, stamped. You speak with a young scribe who shows you the new system, simplified numbers, broader units, pictographic short forms. Faster, less detail, easier to teach. You smile politely, but you know the cost of speed. And then you ask, where do you keep the rejected drafts? The scribe frowns. We erase them. You nod and say nothing more. But you think of all that's lost, the mistakes that tell the truth, the miscounts that reveal a hand's intent, the erasures that hide a kingdom's soul. The final entry. Back in your small room, you press your final tablet. It is not a tally. It is not for the temple. It is for no one and everyone. The numbers built the walls. The numbers fed the builders. The numbers told the story of the stones. But then the numbers began to sing songs they had never learned, and the stones began to fall. You bake this one, fire it hot, let it harden like prophecy. Then you bury it, not beneath your room, but deep near the city gate, where people come and go, where feet will pass for centuries. You leave no name, only the mark. A sign that someone saw. Final reflection. Clay was the first mirror in which civilization saw its own face. Not in art, not in poetry, but in ledgers, in grain counts, in how many oxen it took to build a road, in how many loaves were owed to a god, in who gave and who took more than their share. And now you wonder, as your hands stiffen and your eyes blur, what happens when the mirror forgets how to reflect? Story 4. Bread, Salt, and Patience. A Roman baker's ordinary day. The first loaf before dawn. The city never truly sleeps, but it does pause. In that pause, sometime before dawn, long before the noise and sweat and spectacle of Rome awakens, you are already up. You are a baker, and that means your world begins in the dark. Your name is Marcus, son of freedmen, born in the Subura district under a leaking roof and a market stall. Your father cleaned grain for the army. Your mother folded olive paste into rough bread and sold it to passing sailors. You have known flour longer than you've known Latin. Now you run a modest bakery in the shadow of the Aventine Hill, one of dozens on your street alone. You do not feed senators or poets or generals. You feed workers, carters, builders, men who will be climbing scaffolds and hauling bricks by sunrise. Your bread hard, simple, round must be ready before they are. And so in the darkness you rise. The fire and the stone. Your feet find the floor instinctively. The coals in the oven have been banked low overnight, but they still hum with warmth. You stoke them carefully, feeding them olive wood slats and vine trimmings, fanning the embers until the stone-lined dome begins to glow with its slow, orange heartbeat. Heat is not just heat, it is rhythm, timing, language. Too hot and the crust burns, blackens. Too cool and the center turns dense, soggy. You do not measure temperature. You feel it in your wrist bones, in the way the flour shifts as it meets water. You mix by hand, arms already coated in dust, shoulders flexing with the old ache. The flour is coarse, laced with bits of husk. The water is clean enough today, fetched before the aqueduct channel near the circus became crowded. You add a pinch of salt, more precious than you let on. Some mornings there is also oil, rarely honey. But the base is always the same: flour, water, patience. The people who wait. As the first light begins to trace the rooftops, you're no longer alone. Lucia arrives, a neighbor's daughter, barely 16 but clever with the kneading board. She hums while she works, even when tired. Sometimes you wish she'd stop. Sometimes you miss it when she's silent. Then your cousin Felix shuffles in, shaking off the sleep of too much wine. He's good with deliveries, if a bit forgetful. You keep him because he's family, and because he once caught your oven when it nearly collapsed. Soon there are 6 of you in the shop, kneading, shaping, sliding dough into the oven's throat with wooden paddles, dusting finished loaves with flour before stacking them in baskets. Outside, the street begins to growl. Carts rattle over stone. A woman calls out for figs. A boy is already shouting prices for yesterday's olives. The smell of horse dung mixes with roasted meat and clay dust. But through it all, your bread rises. The loaves themselves. You don't name your loaves, but you know them like friends. Panis quadratus, the large, scored round loaf, marked with a cross to portion evenly. Panis militaris dense, portable, made for soldiers on the march. Panis plebeius rough, chewy, cheap. Panis candidus white bread, rare, expensive, made from fine flour sifted 4 times. You almost never bake it. Most of your customers can't afford variety. They buy what fills the stomach, not what delights the tongue. But even cheap bread can be good, crusty, warm, honest. You take pride in that. Sometimes when a particularly good batch cools, you catch yourself admiring it. The tiny cracks in the crust, the way steam escapes when split open, a fleeting sculpture gone before noon. You never say this aloud, of course. You are a baker, not a philosopher. A city fed by fire. You are not alone. Rome has over 300 bakeries, depending on the season. Some serve the rich, some supply the legions. Others, like yours, feed the city's unremarkable millions, the hands and backs that carry the empire on their shoulders. The state, too, depends on bakers. Every week, grain arrives from Africa or Egypt, funneled through the port at Ostia, tracked, taxed, weighed, and distributed through the Annona, the state grain dole. Much of it ends up here in flour form, doled out to plebeians who rely on cheap bread to survive. The emperor, whoever he may be this year, is measured by 2 things, bread and circuses. Without both, even the most golden statues are pulled down. You don't think much about emperors, but you know how many bags of flour you need to keep your customers fed, and how many hours you'll lose if even one cart doesn't arrive on time. Midday restlessness. By midday, the fire is low again. Most loaves are gone. A few broken ones are fed to the pigs. You sit in the shade behind the shop, scraping dough from your fingers. Your arms ache. Your clothes are gray with flour. Your sandals stick slightly with every step. You've eaten nothing since before sunrise, but hunger arrives second to exhaustion. Lucia hums again. You let her. It keeps the silence from feeling too big. Sometimes on quiet days, you wonder what it would be like to do something else. To be a tanner, maybe, or a fisherman, or one of those men who carries water in huge clay jugs, bellowing down alleys with their bare feet slapping stone. But you always return to the oven. You know its rhythm, its smell, its silence. You know how to coax heat from it like a conversation. Other work seems louder. The grain of memory. You remember dimly the food riots of 10 years ago when the grain shipments were delayed and the city boiled like an overcooked stew. Bakers were blamed, even though they had nothing to do with it. One was beaten to death near the Forum. You were younger then, apprenticing under a man who always double-locked the back door. That man is gone now. Fever took him in the heat of summer, but his oven is still here. You use it every day. You've patched its cracks with the same clay. You still use his paddle, the one with the smooth handle from so many years of gripping. Sometimes you think, a baker's real legacy is not the bread, it's the fire that survives him. The final loaf. As the light fades, you bake one last round. Not for sale, not for customers. For home. You save the best dough for it, just a little extra salt. You bake it slower, letting the crust rise a little higher. You wrap it in cloth, still warm, and carry it under your arm through the narrow alleys toward the tenement where your sister lives with her children. They wait for you at the door, noses already in the air. You break the loaf in half. Steam escapes. The children cheer softly, tearing pieces off like treasure. This is why you do it. Not for coin, not for pride, but for this moment, simple, fleeting, sacred in its own small way. And yet, as you walk back to your darkened bakery, wiping crumbs from your tunic, one question lingers with the settling ash of the oven. What happens to the city if the ovens go cold? Smoke in the streets. 2 mornings later, your flour delivery is late. It should have come before dawn from the state grain warehouse at the foot of the Aventine, but the cart never arrived. You wait, arms folded, breath misting slightly in the early light. Without flour, you cannot knead. Without kneading, no baking. Without bread, no breakfast for the hundreds who line up along your street every morning. You ask around. A rival baker 2 alleys down mutters about delays at the warehouse. Something wrong with the ledgers, he says, or maybe the carts. Either way, no flour, not just us. By noon, it's clear. A disruption. Not a famine, not yet, but a pause in the supply chain. And a city like Rome does not handle pauses well. The system of feeding millions. Rome runs on wheat. Every day, an estimated 150,000 citizens receive subsidized grain as part of the annona, the state-run grain distribution system. It is the invisible backbone of Roman civic order. Bread is not a luxury. It is an expectation, a right for the plebeians paid for not in coin, but in political peace. Ships from Africa and Egypt, vast convoys, slow and heavily guarded, bring wheat up the Tiber or through Ostia. The grain is then stored, measured, and milled into flour in government-run granaries. Your bakery, like many, receives a portion of this flour at regulated prices, a system designed to keep loaves cheap and tempers cool. But when the chain breaks, even briefly, everyone notices. The crowd grows. By late morning, people begin knocking on your shutters. Not many at first, a few regulars. They aren't angry yet. They ask politely, anything left? Just one for my boy. Do you know if your cousin's bakery has any? You shake your head. You offer the few loaves you managed to bake yesterday from leftover dough. They're gone in minutes. By midday, the tone has changed. Voices sharpen. Questions become demands. What do you mean, no flour? I saw you had bread yesterday. What happened? You hoarding for the rich, is that it? You explain calmly, over and over, but the logic doesn't soothe the hunger. You close the shutters. Fear bakes faster than bread. In Rome, hunger is political. A single day without bread can be dismissed. 2 days become rumor. 3, and fires begin. You remember stories from your childhood how, during Nero's reign, shortages sparked a riot that spilled into the Forum, and how the crowd tried to storm the Horia grain storehouses, shouting for the heads of officials. Even the emperor had to appear in person, promising extra rations to calm the masses. You're not thinking about riots, not yet, but you are thinking about how many loaves you can make with the emergency flour hidden in the back, your personal reserve. A few sacks you'd bought privately after last harvest, saved for lean times. It could feed your neighbors, or it could keep your own family fed for a week. You look at the sacks. You do not reach for them, not yet. Trouble in the Forum. The rumors move faster than carts. By the next morning, the flour delivery has still not come. Neither has news, but people arrive early, not for bread but for answers. One woman, wrapped in a torn shawl, stands by your doorway and prays aloud, not to the gods but to you. You fed my husband last year when he broke his hand. You're a good man, Marcus, please. You give her half a loaf. You regret it immediately. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because now the others see. Now they ask. Now every face becomes a mouth, every mouth a demand. You close the shop early. Later you hear that something happened near the Capitoline. A fight, they say, between citizens and the grain clerks. Someone knocked over a tally table. Guards were called. One man lost an eye. It hasn't reached your district, not yet. But Rome is like a kiln, and the heat is rising. The decision to open the reserve. That evening, you sit with Lucia and Felix, and 2 others who have worked with you for years. You show them the sacks. You ask what they think. Lucia shrugs. We use it now, we feed some. We keep it, we might feed ourselves later. Felix says nothing, just stares at the sacks. You decide. You use it carefully. 3 loaves per family, first come, first served. No coin accepted, no promises made. You bake through the night, a fevered, focused rhythm. Sweat in your eyes, muscles numb from repetition. The oven creaks from overuse. The fire burns too hot, but you push on. By dawn, the street smells like comfort again. Lines in order. Word spreads. The line forms early, wrapping around the block, but it's quiet, surprisingly so. People stand in the fog with arms crossed, shoulders slouched, eyes hollow but patient. You open the shutters. Felix begins to pass loaves out. It feels holy. You don't speak, you don't explain, you just give. 3 loaves here, 2 there. 1 to the boy whose father died in the canal collapse. 1 more for the old woman who hasn't missed a day in your bakery in 10 years. They thank you. Some cry. Some don't speak at all. By midday, it's gone. The visit. That night, a man in a clean tunic knocks on your door. He carries a wooden tablet, a wax seal, and a polite smile. He is from the grain office, not an enforcer, but a watcher. You gave out bread, he says, free from private stores. You nod. He writes something down. There's word that some bakeries are hoarding, others are selling above legal price. Yours is unusual. You wait. Expect an official inquiry, but I thank you. He leaves. You sit in the dark, listening to the oven creak as it cools. And as sleep finally comes, slow and heavy, one thought lingers like the scent of burnt crust. If the state cannot feed the people, must the bakers become the state? Crumbs of an empire. The flour returns. Not with fanfare, not with apology, but with the slow grind of bureaucracy catching up to panic. A cart creaks into your alley at dawn 3 days after the riots at the Capitoline. The sacks are stamped, inspected, and already a little damp. But they're here. You breathe easier, though you do not smile. The people notice. They watch from their doors, their benches, the edge of the square where stray dogs circle and old men play dice. The line forms again, not desperate this time, but expectant. The rhythm of hunger has returned to its normal tempo. You rest your hand on one of the sacks, still warm from the sun. You wonder how many hands touched this grain before it reached yours. How many farmers, barge workers, soldiers, accountants, and clerks? How many signatures? How many bribes? The bread, you realize, is never just bread. It is the final product of an invisible empire. Tending the ashes. You don't bake that day. Not immediately. You clean instead, ash swept from the oven's mouth, dried dough scraped from the counters. The tools are cleaned, the paddles washed. You work slowly, without hurry, letting your muscles ease into familiarity again. Lucia hums. Felix makes a joke about selling air bread for 2 denarii apiece. You laugh not because it's funny, but because it breaks the tension. By evening, the ovens are full again. The inspector returns. A week later, the man from the grain office returns. He's cleaner this time, more formal. He wears a longer tunic and his wax tablet is fresher. His questions are more pointed. You distributed bread without license. You undercut the market price. You interfered with the Anona's chain of control. You nod. But then he says something you don't expect. The prefect wishes to commend your actions. He hands you a small wooden plaque, engraved with a palm branch and your name. An official commendation. Rome cannot run on law alone, he says. Sometimes it needs its bakers. He leaves before you can respond. The price of recognition. The plaque hangs by your doorway now. Customers see it when they enter. Some nod respectfully, others glance away. Business increases, so do expectations. You are now known not just as a baker, but as a civic example. A man who stood firm during shortage, who fed the neighborhood without coin. Some people come for bread. Some come for a glimpse of the man who dared to share. You begin to feel less like a tradesman and more like a symbol. You don't know if you like it. Quiet restorations. In time, the flour shipments stabilize, prices settle. The riots fade into memory. The man who lost his eye at the forum is given a pension. The baker who hoarded flour is fined but not closed. Rome, as always, absorbs chaos and carries on. Your days return to the familiar. Wake before dawn. Stoke the fire. Knead. Bake. Feed. But something in you has changed. You pay more attention to the delivery lists now. You read the state decrees more carefully. You speak to other bakers about prices, routes, weather in Egypt. You become attuned not just to dough, but to systems. You used to feed the stomach. Now you understand how you feed the city. A visit from the schoolboy. One morning a boy comes to your door with a wax tablet and an ink-stained tunic. He is 12 maybe, serious eyes. "I'm writing a school exercise about bread," he says. "My master told us to interview someone who knows what Rome needs." You almost laugh. Instead, you invite him in. He asks you about fire, about flour, about how long a loaf should bake. You tell him all of it. He listens carefully, records everything in messy script. Then he asks almost sheepishly, "Is it true you fed the street during the shortage?" You nod. "Why?" You pause. The oven groans softly in the background. "Because bread doesn't wait for politics," you say, "and neither do people." The boy scribbles it down. He thanks you. And as he leaves, you wonder if he will become a baker, or a senator, or a man who forgets the taste of real crust. Final reflection. Years from now, the oven will crack. The bakery will change hands. Your name may fade from the wall, the wooden plaque eaten by termites or sold for scrap. The city will continue, perhaps more grand, perhaps less. But the people will still wake hungry. And someone will still rise before dawn. Someone will still knead and sweat and feed. Bread is boring, bread is basic, bread is everything. It is the hum beneath the trumpet, the foundation beneath the marble, the thing that lets emperors sleep and wakes the city when they fail. You know this now, as you pull the last loaf from the oven, the crust still crackling in your hand. Rome is not held together by law. Rome is held together by bread. Story 5, The Whispering Loom, Life in a 14th Century Weaving Guild. Warp and weft in the shadows of Bruges. The clatter of the loom begins before the sky has cleared its throat. It is still dark in the narrow, cobbled alleys of Bruges, and the city feels held in a moment between stillness and motion. But inside a small stone workshop behind St. Christopher's Church, the wooden frame of a massive vertical loom creaks to life like the ribs of a waking beast. You are a weaver, more specifically, a journeyman in the city's guild. You have no noble name, no coin beyond what's tucked in a leather pouch beneath your bench, but you carry something more valuable: skill. Thread by thread, you bind the needs of kings and merchants, the dreams of fashion and the demands of war, into fabric. Not grand tapestries, not yet. Just bolts of wool dyed and measured, sold by the length to merchants who will claim credit for your labor. But still, the loom speaks through you. And when it whispers, the city listens. The workshop, the tools, the world. Your master's workshop smells of lanolin and cold iron, of oil for the bobbins and sheep's grease baked into rough wool. It's not a large place. 4 looms crowd the room, each taller than a man, their wooden beams blackened with age, their treadles worn to smooth curves under countless feet. The air is cool this morning, your breath ghosting as you lift the heddle rods into place. The warp threads, hundreds of them, have been strung the night before. The weft will come with each pass of the shuttle, one line at a time. You guide it with patience, watching as the pattern emerges, row after row. You're working on plain weave today, cheap, durable, and in demand. Not art, but utility. The merchant wants 15 ells of dark green cloth before the feast of St. Bavo. That means working through dusk every day, and sometimes by tallow lamp. Your fingers are quick, they must be. You get paid by the length, not the hour. The guild above you. The weaving guild is old, powerful, and silent. You are not a free worker. You're a cog in a tightly managed structure, apprentice, journeyman, master. You rose from apprentice 2 winters ago when your final test cloth passed inspection. A dozen elders bent over it like monks reading scripture. They traced the seams, measured the pattern, held it to the light. They said nothing, simply nodded. You became a journeyman. But you are still not free. To set up your own loom, to sell your cloth under your own name, to mark it with your own seal, that requires becoming a master. And the path to mastery is narrow, steep, and usually paved with patronage. For now you work under Master Willem, a fair man, stern but honest. He once wove velvet for the Queen of France. Now he mostly manages orders and supervises the young apprentices who sweep the shop and boil the dye pots. You are his second best weaver. You know this because he never says so, but he always gives you the most delicate commissions. Praise in the city is quiet. Cloth in conflict. Outside the workshop, Bruges is restless. Flanders is a rich land, rich in sheep, rich in trade, rich in cities that clothe half of Europe. English wool flows into Bruges like blood into a beating heart, and from it flows fabric dyed, combed, pressed, folded, destined for Italy, France, even Constantinople. But wealth draws attention, and taxes. The counts of Flanders have made promises to both the King of France and the guild leaders of Bruges. Meanwhile, the burghers and guildsmen speak in murmured tones about rights, tolls, and independence. The wool merchants complain about tariffs. The dyers protest the price of alum. And the weavers, they whisper. In the corners of taverns, behind the backs of masters, at the fulling mills and the dye sheds. You've heard it too. Some say the guild leaders take bribes, that new masters are chosen not by merit but by lineage, that the city's prosperity is being hoarded by the few while the many bend over looms until their spines twist. You've not repeated these things, but you have listened. And the loom, ever neutral, carries on. A personal thread. Your hands are blistered in 3 places. You don't remember when it started. Perhaps last week during the rush to finish the blue brocade. Perhaps earlier. You wrap them now in linen strips, tight but not enough to slow your shuttle. The pain is dull, familiar. At break, you eat hard cheese and bread near the dye vat, trading soft words with the other journeymen. One of them, Pieter, speaks in half-sentences about a secret meeting in the lower town. Talk of opening a new guild, he mutters, eyes watching the doorway. Independent outside the charter, you ask. He shrugs. There's more cloth than the masters can control, more weavers than they can silence. You say nothing, but your mind spins faster than the shuttle. Night in the workshop. That evening, after the apprentices have gone and the fires are low, you stay behind to finish a final section. The green cloth is nearly done, 11 ells completed, smooth and even. You feel a quiet pride, but you also feel the weight of repetition. The same treadles, the same knots, the same splinters in the bench. Years of doing the same task, over and over, in service of other men's names. You think of the merchant who will stamp his seal onto the finished bolt, sell it in a distant market, and claim a craftsman's credit. You wonder, what would it feel like to press your own seal into wax for once? You push the thought away. You clean your tools. You bank the fire. And yet, as you walk home through the damp alleys of Bruges, the wind pulling threads of mist across the stones, a question weaves itself through your thoughts like a persistent weft. What happens when the loom begins to whisper too loudly to ignore? Threads of rebellion. The next evening, you attend the meeting. Not because you want to rebel, not exactly, but because the loom has taught you that tension held too long will snap. And you can feel that tension in the streets of Bruges, in the Guildhall whispers, in your own chest. The meeting is in the back of a cooper's shop. near the fish market. You follow Pieter through a side alley, ducking under low beams and stepping carefully over cracked cobblestones. Inside it is warm, almost too warm. A dozen men and women, mostly journeymen, some full weavers, some laborers. None are masters. That is important. There are no names exchanged, only nods. A woman older, her hair tucked under a soot-stained coif, stands and speaks. We have the hands, we have the tools. What we lack is the right. Her voice is hard, worn from years in dye fumes and wool dust. The Guild Council grants mastership not on merit but on favor, and now the city wants to tax cloth at the loom. They say it's to pay for the Count's banquet. A few curse under their breath. One man spits. We are not thieves, she says, but we are not slaves. You listen. You do not speak. But something shifts in you, like the first thread tightened on a new warp. Rules that bind. The Weaving Guild is ancient, and its charter unbending. To become a master, you must present a masterpiece, a bolt of cloth of exquisite precision, judged by existing masters. Pay a large entry fee. Be approved by the Guild Council, a body of established masters, most of them related by blood or marriage. It is the third requirement that breaks many. Masterpieces can be woven, fees can be saved over time, but approval, that must be earned by favor, politics, or inheritance. The system is elegant and airtight. It protects the old families. It keeps control over trade, and it ensures that no journeyman, no matter how skilled, may rise without permission. But the city is growing. Demand for cloth outpaces control. More and more are turning to illegal looms, unregistered, operating in basements or barns. Guild enforcers break them when they find them. Sometimes they break more than looms. The meeting is not just about independence. It's about survival. The Gray Loom. A week later, Pieter invites you to see something. In the cellar of an abandoned tannery, beneath rusted iron hooks and moss-covered beams, there is a loom not elegant, but solid, built from scrap wood and patched with iron brackets. We call it the Gray Loom, he says. It's illegal, entirely outside the guild. And yet it works. The warp is tight, the shuttle runs smooth, the cloth it produces is coarse but honest. Each weaver takes a turn, Pieter explains. We sell the bolts through the river traders, quietly, no stamps, no names. You run your fingers over the freshly woven cloth. It's not beautiful, but it's free. And it speaks louder than any protest. You want to shift, Pieter asks. You say yes. Loom and loyalty. You don't tell Master Willem. Not yet. He's kind, but he is a guild man, sworn, pledged, and respected. He would report you, not out of cruelty, but out of obligation. So you work your legal hours in the shop, weaving under license. Then you slip away at night to the Gray Loom, weaving in silence, shoulder to shoulder with others who have no plaque, no title, only hands that know the rhythm. You feel no shame, only purpose. Every yard of cloth pulled from that hidden loom feels like a declaration. That skill alone should grant a weaver freedom. And as weeks pass, you begin to see more changes. The city is stirring. Bruges wakes. The rumors spread quickly now. A dyer's apprentice fined 2 shillings for using unregistered alum. A tailor whipped for buying illegal cloth. A shipment of gray loom bolts seized at the river docks, burned publicly. A journeyman arrested for distributing pamphlets with wax-sealed cloth samples, a crude, silent petition. Master Willem's mood darkens. He speaks less. He locks the dye cabinet at night. He begins checking the apprentice's hands for signs of outside work, the telltale blisters, the dye under the nails. He never asks you directly. But one night, as you adjust the warp on your official loom, he places a hand on your shoulder. They are watching the shops, he says quietly. You nod. Nothing more is said. But that night, you skip your gray loom shift. You don't sleep. An offer. One morning, a letter arrives. Thick parchment unsealed. Inside, an invitation to present a test cloth for possible consideration as a master. No signature, just an address, a private hall near the guild offices. You're stunned. No bribes, no petitions, no name dropping, just a simple invitation. Pieter sees it and frowns. Careful, he says, they may be watching. You wonder, is it a genuine offer, a test, a trap? You look at your hands, scarred, calloused, capable. You could weave something beautiful. But should you? As you run your thumb across the grain of the letter, a thought settles in the back of your mind, heavy as wet wool. Is mastery still freedom, if it means abandoning the threads that wove your courage? The masterpiece and the ghost threads. The room is quiet except for the creak of your stool and the soft slap of the shuttle as it moves back and forth, back and forth. The cloth you're weaving now is not for sale. It is not illegal either, not yet. It's your masterpiece. And it must be perfect. The warp is dyed in rich indigo, the weft a pale, silvery gray. You've chosen a pattern that's simple in form, but precise, a repeating vine motif that grows along the length of the fabric, like something living and breathing beneath your hands. This is the cloth that will decide your future. Your fingers move with confidence, every motion deliberate, every thread exactly where it must be. But your heart stirs uneasily. Because this piece, it doesn't just contain wool and skill. It contains a decision. The silent judges. The hall is colder than you expected. 3 men and 1 woman sit at a long table, cloaked in wool dyed in the deep blue reserved for master weavers. One of them, an older man with a half-missing ear, is chewing cloves to keep from nodding off. You present the bolt of cloth on a wide plank, carefully unrolled, each corner weighted to show how evenly the pattern aligns. No one speaks for several minutes. They run their hands across the surface. They hold it to the light from the window. They check both ends for symmetry. Finally, one speaks. Fine work, the woman says. Clean edges, balanced tension, a steady shuttle. Another grunts in agreement. The old man looks at you for the first time. But who taught you the vine motif, he asks. It's not of Bruges. You answer honestly. It's older than Bruges. I saw it once in a cloth from Lucca. I remembered it. There is a pause, then a nod. Innovation within tradition. Good. Then the questions begin. How many ells can you weave in a week? What's your preferred weft tension on combed fleece? How would you price a bolt for the Bruges summer market versus the Ghent fair? You answer calmly. You've prepared. But inside your thoughts drift, to the gray loom, to Pieter, to those who will never be allowed to sit in this room. Approval. 3 days later, the letter comes. You are approved for mastership. On the surface, this is everything you've worked toward. A personal loom, a public seal, your name in the city register, legally recognized. Full rights to hire journeymen, set prices, and sell under your own brand. You should be filled with pride. But what you feel is hesitation. Because becoming a master in Bruges means more than skill. It means acceptance of the guild structure, its rules, its blind spots. And worst of all, you know what this promotion will be used for. They will hold you up as proof that the system works, that upward mobility is possible, that those who whisper and rebel need only wait their turn. And yet, you want the loom. You want the name. You want to feed your family on cloth with your own seal. One last visit. You return to the tannery at night, just once. The gray loom is still there, still humming. Pieter is at the treadles, weaving slowly, deliberately. He looks up, surprised. You show him the letter. He doesn't congratulate you. Instead, he asks, "Will you shut us down?" You shake your head. "I won't report it, but I can't come anymore." He nods. There is silence for a while. Then he says, "Be a different kind of master." You leave without another word. The loom continues to whisper in the dark. The seal. Your workshop is small, 2 looms, 1 journeyman, a bright window that lets in the smell of the canal. But it is yours. And one morning, you heat a bit of wax, press your new brass seal into it, and affix it to your first bolt of cloth. Your mark. Your name. It is not just a brand, it is a statement. You begin to take on apprentices not from the guild list, but from the neighborhoods most others ignore. Girls, sons of foreign traders, the son of a man who once wove at the gray loom. Some in the guild scowl, others look away. You stay quiet, but your cloth speaks for you. And customers listen. Reflection. You did not topple the guild. You did not start a revolution. But your presence, your decisions, shifted the tension on the warp. Quietly, carefully, one thread at a time. And like a pattern too subtle to see up close, the change will only become clear over years, maybe generations. You are a master. But more importantly, you remember what it felt like not to be one. So when a boy shows up one morning, clutching a rough sample woven on an unlicensed loom, asking for an apprenticeship, you don't ask for his papers. You look at the cloth. You hold it to the light. You nod. And in that moment, the loom speaks again, not just for you, but for all those still waiting to be seen. Story 6, Dust and Silence, the forgotten astronomer of Abbasid Baghdad. The observatory on the Tigris. You awaken before the call to prayer. The morning air in Baghdad is cool and thick with the scent of river silt, parchment glue, and distant fig smoke. The Tigris flows slowly outside your window, quiet and constant. You live in the house of Wisdom Beit al-Hikmah, or rather, in one of its many side chambers. You are not a scholar of renown, not a name known in the court or to the caliph's advisors. You are an observer, an assistant, a quiet mind among the scrolls and lenses. But tonight, as the sky shifts above the eastern horizon, you are the only one watching the stars. The age of translations. It is the year 865 CE. The Abbasid Caliphate is at its cultural height, and Baghdad, shining at the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, is the center of the intellectual world. Books arrive by camel, by boat, by hand, Greek manuscripts, Persian treatises, Indian scrolls, Syriac fragments, all destined for translation. You are one of many who copy, annotate, measure. But astronomy, that is your secret love. The great names echo in the main halls: Al-Khwarizmi, Al-Farghani, Thabit ibn Qurra. But you are just a student. Your hands smell of ink and brass polish. Your tunic is threadbare at the sleeves from leaning over too many observation tables. And yet, it is you who has noticed something strange in the sky. The star that moved too slowly. For weeks now, one star in the constellation of Scorpius has behaved oddly. It lags behind the others in its arc. Not enough to cause alarm, not enough for the masters to investigate, but enough for you to keep your logbook open later than usual, to squint through your polished lens well after the others have gone to sleep. You are using an astrolabe of your own construction, crude, but accurate. Bronze, cut with a worn file, balanced with a sheep's wool thread soaked in wax. You have plotted the anomaly's position 3 nights in a row now. It is not a star. It is something else. Inside the dome. The observatory is a narrow dome attached to the rear of the House of Wisdom. You must climb a steep stair, then open a lattice of carved wood shutters to access the night sky. Inside there are 4 instruments. A large armillary sphere, gifted by a Persian note. a fixed mural quadrant carved into the stone wall, a celestial globe outdated by 2 generations, and your own small astrolabe, which you keep hidden when the masters are present. You have no permission to be here tonight. But permission is flexible when one walks softly, and when the sky insists. The quiet between caliphs. Outside the world of charts and orbits, the empire is shifting. Caliph al-Mutawakil was assassinated just 5 years ago. His son, al-Mu'taz, rules now but weakly. Court politics are volatile. Soldiers grumble in the barracks. Wazirs change weekly. Science still flourishes, but the support is less certain. Scholars now copy older texts more than they write new ones. Safe knowledge is preferred to bold theory. You know this, which is why you do not yet share what you've observed. To name a new celestial object is to challenge the completeness of the ancients Ptolemy, Aratus, Hipparchus. And in an empire that honors the past, the future must whisper its way forward. Your scrolls. Your room is cluttered, not with riches but with calculations. Scrolls of Indian lunar ephemerides. Greek fragments that survived translation from Alexandria. Your own logbook, filled with crude Arabic script and hand-drawn arcs. A wax tablet that smells faintly of bees and sun. You've begun to draft a table of the anomaly's position relative to the fixed stars. If it is what you think, not a star, but a planet, then it should continue to move westward against the background constellations. And if it continues, it could suggest a revision to existing planetary tables. But you are just a junior observer. Who would listen? A name on the margin. One day, while checking your ink stock, you open an old Greek manuscript, a partial copy of Ptolemy's Almagest, already translated into Arabic by Al-Hajjaj. And there in the margin, in faded Syriac, a light that moves against the sphere, seen in the 196th Olympiad. It's a note, a scribble, perhaps a reference to the same object. The date roughly matches the orbit you've plotted if it's elliptical and not circular. Could it be the same thing? A retrograde visitor seen once in ancient Greece and now again in Baghdad. And as you step onto the dome platform that night, the breeze carrying the scent of dust and basil, you feel the weight of the question more than the instrument in your hand. What if the universe has been whispering truths for centuries, and we've simply forgotten how to listen? Against the heavens, the fourth night brings confirmation. You compare your fresh coordinates to those plotted 6 days prior, and the body has moved, barely but undeniably. It is no fixed star. Its glow is steady, unblinking, and warmer than a typical planet like Saturn or Jupiter, but its motion is smooth, westward, and true. You do not cheer. You do not cry out. Instead, you return to your bench and begin a second scroll, this one neater, prepared, meant not for your own mind but for the mind of another. It is time to share the discovery. But with whom? The keeper of instruments. You begin with Ishak, the aging keeper of the armillary sphere, a quiet scholar who rarely speaks unless asked about mechanics or metal polish. You bring him the scroll, carefully written, sealed with beeswax and a simple mark, a circle with a single dot in the center. He reads slowly, then again aloud. You watch his eyes flicker toward the window. You must not speak of this broadly, he says. You nod. Do you believe it to be real? He does not answer for a long moment. Then, I believe the heavens are wide and our charts are narrow. He makes no promise to help, but keeps the scroll tucked into his sleeve. That night, a second observer joins you at the dome. It is Ishak. He does not speak, but he brings his own lens. The silence of scholars. In the days that follow, you begin to feel the discomfort that comes with disrupting old certainties. Your fellow observers avoid your gaze. The translating clerks no longer invite you to midday tea. Even your name is left off the rota for minor celestial updates to the official ephemerides. You are not being punished, not formally. But ignorance is safer than novelty, especially in times of imperial doubt. The caliph's patronate still funds the House of Wisdom for now, but budgets are tightening. 2 scholars have already been reassigned to purely theological duties. And you are now seen as a risk for noticing what should not be noticed. The stranger. One evening, as the lamps are being lit, a man arrives at your chamber. He wears no scholar's robe, no tools, no insignia. Just a pale wool cloak, clean sandals, and a scroll case bound in cord. He introduces himself as Bashir a court scribe. The caliph's advisors have heard of your sighting, he says. You freeze. You did not speak to anyone beyond Ishak. He notices your hesitation. Ishak said nothing, but the dome's logs are public. You've marked every night with coordinates. Someone noticed. You feel foolish. Of course. Even secrets have paperwork. An offer and a warning. Bashir tells you that a formal request has been made. You are to submit your findings to the chief astronomer, a man whose reputation for Ptolemaic orthodoxy is legendary. He will not welcome disruption, Bashir warns, but the court may. You hesitate. This is your moment, but also your greatest risk. Do you defend your scrolls before those who might laugh, or worse, silence you? Or do you remain quiet, let the knowledge remain yours alone? Then Bashir says something unexpected. Truth does not belong to its discoverer, only its courage. He leaves without another word. You do not sleep that night. The tribunal. You present your scrolls before the review council, a table of 5 men, including the chief astronomer, 2 mathematicians, 1 astrologer, and a Persian translator of Indian ephemerides. Your data is neat, your plots are clean, your methods sound. You expect skepticism. You expect laughter. But what you hear is worse. You are not authorized to observe independently. These charts do not conform to sanctioned models. You have misused state instruments. You threaten harmony with speculation. Only the Persian speaks in your defense, quietly nodding the match between your arc and an anomaly recorded in Sanskrit tables from Ujjain nearly 200 years prior. The room falls silent. The chief astronomer leans forward. You claim a wandering body not charted in the Almagest, not predicted in the Zij al-Sindhind, not sanctioned by model or faith. You answer, yes. He folds your scroll shut. Then let silence correct you. The return to dust. You are reassigned. No longer permitted to observe, you are moved to the index room, a windowless chamber beneath the scriptorium where scrolls are copied, cataloged, and stored. You work alone. All instruments are removed from your possession. Your astrolabe is taken. Your notes are confiscated, though you suspect copies were made. You are not imprisoned. You are not exiled. You are simply forgotten. Which is worse? A gift in secret. Weeks later, Ishak visits. He does not speak, but leaves something on your bench. Wrapped in linen, a small folded square of bronze. Your astrolabe repaired and polished. Etched on its edge are 5 small dots in a pattern. The same arc you traced in the night sky. He never returns. And now, as you sit in the dim chamber surrounded by scrolls of others' ideas, the dust thick and the candle near spent, you wonder, is a truth unseen still a truth? Echoes in the ephemeris. Years pass. The House of Wisdom no longer smells of fresh ink and boiling parchment glue. Fewer scrolls arrive from foreign lands. The dome is quiet more often than not. The golden age flickers. The Caliph Al-Mu'taz has fallen. His successors drift further from science, closer to courtly excess, and Baghdad, though still vast and beautiful, begins to fray at its golden edges. You still work in the index room, copying, sorting, repairing brittle papyrus, binding torn folios. You are no longer spoken of in scholarly circles if you ever were, but the library remains open and your hand remains steady. You are not angry. You are patient, because the stars do not reward haste. A scribble in the margin. One morning, while mending a worn Arabic translation of the Zijai Shah, your eyes catch something odd: a series of marginal coordinates, not part of the main chart, tiny numbers, written in charcoal. You plot them, and your pulse quickens. They trace an arc. Almost precisely the arc you recorded, though in different terms, using Persian angular divisions. But the shape is familiar, circular, then retrograde, then forward again. Another observer. Another quiet witness. You scan the binding and find a name: Jabir al-Balkai, a scribe stationed in Nishapur some 20 years prior. You've never heard of him, but you feel you know him all the same. Another whisper in the same dust. The constellation of the forgotten. You begin compiling a secret list. Names, not the famous ones, not Ptolemy, not Hipparchus, not Al-Khwarizmi, but the fringe minds, the margin scribblers, the overlooked. Each one left some trace of having seen the same anomaly. A Syriac monk who etched a comet-like arc on a wood panel in Edessa. A Hindu scholar whose notes in Sanskrit reference a slow-moving ember near Scorpio. A Maghribi merchant's astrological chart featuring a sixth wanderer, unnamed. They never made it into the official tables. But together, they begin to form a shadow ephemeris, a quiet record of celestial truth. You copy their markings into your own scroll, a secret chart, your last one. The final orbit. You are now older. Your fingers tremble slightly. Your eyes no longer see clearly at dusk. Your nights are spent not at the dome, but by a small brazier, warming your hands while running your fingers across worn charts. But then, one dry evening, under a particularly cloudless Baghdad sky, something calls you back to the observatory. You climb the same steps, open the same shutters. And there, just above the Tigris, among the bright pricks of Scorpio's curve, you see it again. Faint, steady, familiar. The anomaly. Moving westward slowly, as it always did, as it always does. After all these years, it has returned. You weep not loudly, just enough for your tears to wet the edges of your astrolabe. The legacy in silence. You do not publish your scroll. You know it would be discarded. But you leave it anyway, carefully sealed, placed in a clay jar, tucked behind the third shelf of the index room. Not as a manifesto, but as a message in a bottle. A chart for the next observer. A quiet thread in the loom of truth. And then you resume your duties. Copying, binding, cataloging. Until one day, you simply do not return. No announcement is made. Your name is filed with the rest. But your astrolabe remains, passed quietly into the hands of a younger scribe, who doesn't ask questions, but does polish the bronze every week. And once, just once, that scribe plots the night sky for practice, and pauses at a wandering dot that seems slightly off. Reflections in the sky. Centuries later, astronomers would label this body with modern language: a long-orbit minor planet, likely in the Kuiper belt. Not visible with the naked eye in most conditions, but perhaps, briefly in the right light, under perfect conditions, in a sky unspoiled by fire or city. But to you, to the forgotten ones, it was never about labels. It was about noticing, about humility in the face of the cosmos, about hearing the faint music of the sky, and remembering that no truth is too small to be worth recording.